I'm Gareth Ragg, Senior Presenter at Reuters Events, and I'm very pleased to be joined on the ground at COP28 by Tom Steyer, Co-Executive Chair at Galvanize Climate Solutions. Tom, thank you very much for joining me today.
Gareth, it's a treat to be here.
So let's start with a wide focus lens to start with. How are you feeling about our progress on climate right now?
Well, I think it's a story of two stories.
Okay.
The first one is the natural world. The second is what we're doing about the problems, the crisis in the natural world. So let's start with the natural world.
Yeah.
What we've seen is that the information coming out of the natural world in 2023 has shown an accelerating crisis. We get monthly data in terms of global temperatures.
Yeah.
They have skyrocketed this year. They have really gone to a place that is very surprising. We read about it in the papers, but I don't think people understand that, in fact, everyone has been worried about moving past 1.5 degrees C. Americans don't even know what that means.
Yeah, of course.
But just stipulating that that's a true measure, we're past 1.5 C for the last 3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
And not by a little, we've really moved past it by a great deal.
Yeah.
So the real question is, what does that mean? No one knows. The best climate scientists don't know why the Earth has heated up so dramatically in the last 6 months.
Yeah.
At the same time, when you look about what we're doing to change the energy transition, to move to renewables, to move to electric vehicles, to move to the storage, to really change the way we generate and use energy, we're doing really well, much better than people understand. In terms of deployment, we are deploying renewables around the world much faster than people understand. The adoption of electric vehicles is happening much faster than people understand, and the storage revolution is happening. And why is that happening? It's because the technology has driven costs down, so the cheapest thing you can do if you want to have energy is to use renewables.
Yeah.
And it's even cheaper with renewables and storage. So what we're seeing is the deployment of clean technology is happening much faster than people understand, and the development of new technologies, the technologies to address what are called the hard-to-abate sectors, cement, steel, airlines. Those technologies are happening and being created at a pace that is truly astonishing and very encouraging. So I think the right way to think about it, Gareth, is it's a race.
Yes.
Like, we're getting the numbers from nature and they're terrible, and we're doing something about it as a species, and it's fantastic.
Yeah.
And the question is, okay, who's going to win?
So we're sat here at COP28, and let's be honest, it has been met with some controversy. So how are you feeling about this year's meeting?
Well, obviously there's a controversy because the UN Conference on Climate is being hosted in an oil country and the head of the conference is the head of the national oil company.
Yeah.
So of course there's an overt conflict of interest there. Having said that, I think the best thing you can say about this COP is that everybody, including all of the oil countries and all of the oil companies, now completely accept the idea that we have a climate crisis that has to be addressed. Now, we're fighting about how to do that, but at least now we're addressing the problem together, and there's data to say, does this work?
Yeah.
What is the impact of doing that? So we can actually have a conversation about what is going to work and how are we actually going to win the race I was talking about in terms of catching this climate crisis and reversing it.
So it seems like the difference this year is there's actually a recognition of the issue and action needs to be taken. You're a veteran of a few COPs now. Does the mood in the air feel different to what it has done previously?
Well, I think you have to, if you go back to all the COPs, it's such a mixed bag.
Yeah.
I mean, Paris 2015 was really the first time that the world came together on an agreement of what we were going to do. And the air in Paris in 2015 was electric and incredibly optimistic. I think when we went through the COPs and as an American, I don't like to put it all on America, but during the Trump administration, those COPs, there's no American presence. It was very desultory. It was very disheartening. I went because I felt like people should go. But I think Glasgow was very good. I think this year there is look, we're just at the beginning of the COP, Gareth.
Yeah, of course.
But I think that there is a good chance that people are going to recognize what needs to be done. There's going to be a big controversy about how the future of oil and gas is perceived, developed, and expressed. But in general, I think what people are going to take away from this COP is we absolutely have to address it, and if we don't get everything done here, which of course we won't, I think it's going to set us up to win this race, and we have to win this race.
Sure, so we're not going to see everything we want, but are there some real tangible things you at least hope you see come out of this event?
Well, I think everybody's expecting, a pledge to do a lot more renewables. I think people are expecting pledges to deal with, some of the big sectors like agriculture, that we're really going to go after them.
Yeah.
I think the issue is going to be this question about what are we going to do about moving away from fossil fuels. And let me say this, that's partly a question about what people say, and that matters because the understanding of what we need to do in the world is very important. But the other thing that I absolutely believe and that I stand for is that the market is going to have its say.
Yes.
And what we think is the smart money is moving away from oil and gas.
Yeah.
And you can go look and see what's happening in the oil market itself in terms of pricing and how OPEC keeps pulling back supply in hopes that will drive the price higher, which it is not doing.
Yeah.
But also the prices in the market of oil and gas companies. So we're seeing people's action in the marketplace with no coercion, no policy, just a question of what is the future of these companies, what are they going to be worth? And I think what it's saying is we're moving away from oil and gas.
Yeah, and we're going to come to the investment picture in just 1 second, but as you say, we're just at the start of COP, but we have seen some action on loss and damage so far. What were your thoughts on that?
So I think people are very happy that they've actually got something behind the idea of loss and damage. So let's just take a step back so people all understand it. In the emissions of greenhouse gases and the problems associated with that, the people who've done the overwhelming amount of emissions are the developed countries in the global north. And the people who have suffered the most are people in the global south.
Yeah.
And the sort of rule of thumb is the less you've done to cause the problem, the more you're going to suffer. So there has been a move over the last decade to basically figure out a way to remedy that, to pay back the people who are suffering. And part of that is the idea of a loss and damages account. And this is the first time that people have committed actual dollars to it. But having said that, the numbers of dollars that are going into those accounts versus what needs to be done to actually prepare people and mitigate the problems that have occurred and will occur are, completely disproportionate.
Yeah.
And so from my standpoint, this is an issue that has to be addressed for a whole bunch of reasons.
Yeah.
I mean, including fairness, but much more than that in terms of us pulling together as a globe and being safe and in the interest of everybody, including the global north, to make this work.
Yeah.
And I think that I have some ideas about how that will work that are different from
It's
the ones.
a small step, but
that are
hopefully an
popular.
important first step to something much bigger in the future.
Well, I'm a believer that actually the way this can be done is through market mechanisms.
Yeah.
And I'm someone who's spent years as a professional investor, and I believe that if we set up the frameworks right, the market can move, in very substantial, meaningful ways without coercion. That's what I believe in.
So let's talk about Galvanize and your investment approach. A couple of questions. So why did you actually go out founding Galvanize, and how did you structure the firm?
So I had spent 35 years as a professional investor building a couple very large investment firms. Then I quit that at the end of 2012 and spent 8 years as a climate advocate, saying within the United States, we have to accept this as a crisis, we have to deal with it, and let's make it good.
Yeah.
Let's not just solve a problem, let's, in solving the problem, build a better world for ourselves and everybody else.
Yeah.
At the end of 2020, so coming into 2021, I decided, look, we've won the argument. There's no reason for me to run my mouth anymore.
Yeah.
What we need to do is execute. And so I set up a firm with one of my best friends who's been a professional investor and my friend for 40 years, to say, let's marry our decades of investment expertise with knowledge of climate only in investing in things that will help solve the climate crisis. We call it Galvanize Climate Solutions. And the idea is literally to take the climate crisis as a tailwind to get things done.
I think returns is a really important word there, because often we talk about the size of the crisis, the huge numbers that it was going to require in order to tackle it. But actually, there's a huge opportunity there for investors as well. Is that part of the communication strategy for yourself as well?
Oh, it's huge. But I think let's take one step back, if you don't mind, Gareth.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time on this topic I've spent a lot of time working politically on this topic
Yeah.
and also in the nonprofit sector, the NGO sector.
Sure.
The two things that scale in this world are government
Yeah.
and profits. If you look at who's changed the world, governments and companies.
Yeah.
Companies that are run on the profit motive. And what we're saying is, look, we need that, this has got to be a partnership, but we need companies that absolutely understand the need to win in the marketplace unequivocally.
Yeah.
To have disruptive, fantastic new products and services that will drive the future in a way that is good.
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to do, and that's what Galvanize stands for, to go to the different investment areas, and in each case, build a better mousetrap that is driven by the tailwind of solving the climate crisis.
So you talk about those products and services there. How do you go about actually evaluating the investments and the solutions that you're going to go and invest in ultimately?
Well, in two ways. We have an impact team so that in every investment, we do a measurement of what the impact will be on the climate crisis. And so if it doesn't have a real impact, we don't do it.
Yeah.
And you know, I used to say, if someone comes into my office with a crypto idea that guarantees me 100 to 1 with no climate impact, the answer is no.
Yeah.
But we also are not going to compromise one iota on returns. I mean, one of my good friends who is a very conservative Republican
Sure.
said I should go into every meeting and say, if you're not here for the highest returns in the world, you're in the wrong meeting.
Yeah.
And that's our point, is this has got to win in the marketplace. If it doesn't have real profits, if it doesn't have real scale, it's not worth doing, because we're trying to solve a global problem. And solving that means building really important enterprises.
And there doesn't have to be a trade-off between impact and returns at all.
That is one of the ideas that is so old and outmoded.
Yeah.
In fact, the two are going to go together.
Yeah.
Solving a huge problem is what businesses do. That is the whole point, is to make people solve problems that people may not even know they have. But people, one of the other things I think, Gareth, people are self-interested. We have to just accept it.
Yeah.
So we have to give them something that's better, cheaper, faster, and they don't even have to know it's cleaner.
That's it. We can't expect people to pay more for sustainability.
Absolutely. Look, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal 2 days ago that was saying 2023 was about people understanding that investors and consumers will not pay more for clean tech. It's like, duh. You know, you guys know that now.
caught up now, yeah.
That's always been true.
Yeah.
And so we have to win absolutely in the marketplace, head up, and we're going to. And that was my point about fossil fuels. We're not going to replace fossil fuels because people are nice. We're going to replace fossil fuels because it's so darn much cheaper and better not to use them.
Yeah. So you guys have just about to release a report which you've co-authored with Stanford Business School. Could you just talk us through some of the findings that you're seeing from the report?
Yes. So, I mean, one of the things that's true is an awful lot of companies have given basic pledges to get to net zero by 2050.
Yeah.
Now, it's important to remember that the average tenure for a CEO, a public company CEO, is 4.8 years.
Yeah.
So if you add 4.8 to 2023, so if it's the average is approximately 5 years, the average CEO has 2.5 years left to go in his or her seat. 2023 plus 2.5 gets you to between 2025 and 2026, not 2050. So we believe that there is going to be an overwhelming need for those companies to restate what they're doing or to get real. And so that's the first point. Second point is this. We believe that the assets across the board in the financial system are mispriced because they're not taking into account the impact of climate risk and climate opportunity. And so what we're saying is we need to partially incent the CEOs to do the right thing over the long term and to set up a system so that they're doing the right thing on climate to protect the interests and the money and the income of their companies and by extension their shareholders.
Yeah.
And we're doing a study with Stanford Graduate School of Business, which is where I went,
Okay.
to show what that would look like and how, the old saying in business is people do what you pay them to do.
Sure.
And we're saying let's set up an incentive system where people are paid to take care of the interest of their shareholders in the long run as well as the next quarter.
So can you give us an insight into what that compensation plan could look like going forward?
Well, I think in each case it's going to be different by company, right? Because different companies are going to have different emissions profiles
Yes.
and different impacts. So it's really going to be a question of setting up by industry more than by anything else. Kind of scope what, the different ways that companies cause emissions, measuring them and have a real plan going forward, how they're going to actually get to net zero. And so for us, I think we have there was a move probably about 10 years ago, basically saying that what we need to do as investors is not invest in companies that have emissions. That we should keep our skirts clean. Okay, I understand that. And that is a political idea that really came out of South Africa. Basically, don't invest in companies that do business in South Africa as a political statement that you're against apartheid. We've moved past that. As I said, we've won the argument. Now the question is, how are we going to decarbonize? If someone is running a heavily emitting company, and has a clear plan which he or she follows rigorously to draw down emissions, that is an important decarbonization. That is something that I believe shareholders should invest in, should support. Buying brown and going green is really a huge need for the future, a huge need for institutional investors and investors generally to understand that those CEOs deserve a lot of credit.
Do you think this is going to be controversial? I could see maybe some pushback to this, or is it going to be a sense that these leaders aren't going to have a choice and it's shareholder pressure that's going to force this to happen?
Well, it's funny because we're obviously changing the template for what it means to be a responsible investor on climate. Because the old was, really do no harm. The problem is that if you do no harm, you're really not in the game of changing the world. You maybe have clean skirts, but in fact what we need to do is to get to net zero and to do it as fast as possible and to really help CEOs and support CEOs and pay CEOs to protect the interests and the income and the assets of their shareholders.
Just a couple of questions to finish because unfortunately we're running out of time. We talked a lot about what's happening at COP and many of the positive things. You've had the ability over the years to see round corners a little bit when it comes to with climate change. What's not being talked about at COP right now, which you really wish we should be talking about?
Well, I talked a little bit about the different, obviously there's a huge controversy about whether we're talking about, phasing out oil and gas or whether we're talking about phasing out oil and gas emissions, which the implication is they're going to be offset by direct air capture or carbon capture and sequestration. So that is a huge controversy and one that I think is very important. I also think that we have not come to terms with some of the very important emissions issues in terms of, for instance, agriculture, which is a huge emitter, but which is very disparate and hard to address. And also some of what I believe are absolutely impactful, scalable, and critical sequestration capabilities in the natural world. I am a huge believer in nature-based solutions, that in fact, we can use nature to repair nature and to have an impact not just on our global temperature, but on the cascading impact of destroying the natural world. And it's really, I think when we're so focused on climate, we're so focused on temperature and the impacts. In my opinion, climate and the change in temperature is really a symptom of destroying the natural world. And if in dealing with our climate crisis, which is the thin end of the wedge, we also address the destruction of the natural world, I think that is super important. And I think that the other impact that we've got to address very clearly is the human impact. I think we tend to talk about scientific things. I have been doing this for roughly 15 or 20 years because I'm worried about human suffering. And the idea that we're going to address climate as a scientific, technological business issue without the implications for human suffering around the globe is really unrealistic and dumb. I think it's very hard to look at climate, regardless of where you live, and not see its implications for forced immigration. And so when we think about this, I know we're going to deal with all these very close issues, and that's what this COP is about, these close issues. But if we take a step back,
it's huge.
We have to deal with human beings and humanity and how it's going to impact billions of people.
And as you say, you've been doing this for over 15 years now, and the discourse around climate can veer from fear, frustration, and futility to great hope. So I always like to end these interviews by asking, how optimistic are you right now?
Gareth, there is no doubt in my mind that we're going to solve this problem, but there is no doubt in my mind that we are going to suffer a lot on the way.
Right.
The idea that we could solve this without moving into a place of a lot of human suffering, a lot of pain, a lot of tumult. Look, we've already had it in 2023.
Of course, yeah.
And so, you know, what I would say is, at the end of the 15-round fight, they're going to raise our arm and say humanity won, but we're going to be bloody and we're going to be missing a lot of teeth because we're now in the crisis and we're going to have to deal with that realistically and not think that somehow we're not going back to 1850.
Yeah,
that's off the table. We're going to have to create a new world and hopefully a better world, but it's not going to be the world that we remember from our ancestors. It's going to be a world that's dependent on a new way of thinking, new technologies, and a lot of human progress and human ingenuity.
And on that note, Tom, thank you very much for joining me today.
Gareth, it's a treat.